Andrew shrinks into his hoodie as he walks into the cafeteria. It is noisy. Students have scattered around, some sitting, some walking around, and everybody is either in one group or the other. Paired off, 4 to 6 clique, cheerleaders, football jocks, debate group. Andrew stands at the entrance of the cafeteria and looks around. He had just transferred a week ago to Carmen High, and in that week he had been teased, made fun of, and called every name in the book about having diabetes, and humiliated in front of his whole class, all by a group of mean jocks, Chris, Nick, and Mason. He had only been in Carmen High for a week and hated every minute of it. He scanned the cafeteria once more, looking for, and at the same time, hoping not to see who he was looking for. When he was satisfied that they weren't there, he took a step in. He had barely taken 5 steps in when he felt a hand on his shoulder. Before he turned to see who it was, Andrew knew who it was and had started shaking in his pants. "Well, well, look what we have here. Drew the shrew. So you finally grew the balls to eat in the cafeteria like a normal person." Chris, the leader of the group, and the one Andrew hated the most, said. He laughed. Nick and Mason joined in as they took his arm on both sides and lifted him high, carrying him to the nearest table. Andrew didn't bother to struggle as they effortlessly moved him. He knew what was coming. He had lived through it once, and all he wanted was for it to be over. He closed his eyes and imagined he was at home. In his bedroom, it was his heaven, the only place he ever truly loved in the whole world. However, no matter how desperately he wished he could shut it all out, Chris's voice rang loud and clear as he announced to the cafeteria, "Hear ye, hear ye. Before you stand sugar overload, weak knees, diabetically perfect Drew the shrew. Give it up for him, you all." A tear leaked through Andrew's tightly shut eyelids as all the students laughed. Andrew hears his dad call out to him as he runs blindly into his room. After the show Chris, Nick, and Mason had put on in the cafeteria played out, the principal, Mrs. Gooding, came into the restaurant and dispelled it. She gave Chris, Nick, and Mason a week of detention, and she had turned to Andrew and asked him if he thought he could still handle the rest of the day. When he didn't reply, she saw how he was shaking. She had called Andrew's dad to come and pick him up. It wasn't until later Andrew learned that a student had gone to report to the principal. Andrew silently said a prayer for that student. He slammed the door to his room, dumped his backpack on the floor, and fell face down on his bed, letting all the tears he had held back loose. He hears his dad knocking on the door, asking if he is okay and if he wants to talk. Andrew ignores everything and just sobs into his pillow. After a while, when he realizes Andrew is not going to answer, his dad finally leaves. 5 hours later, at 6:18 p.m., Andrew finally gets up from his bed. He had dozed off somewhere between crying his eyes out and hating his life. He sits in his bed and looks around. The sun spilled into his room through a crack in the window, illuminating the room. He picks up his glasses from his nightstand, puts them on, and walks outside. He sees his dad sitting at the dining table, his reading glasses perched on his face as he peered at his laptop. The light from the sun that shone through the dining area windows washed over his head, lightening the shades of his hair. Andrew stands at the entrance and stares at his dad for a few seconds. For as long as Andrew could remember, he had always wished he could be more like his father, have a quarter of his strength, a pinch of his courage, and not be this weakling. On the good days, he hated the world for being so cruel to him. He hated the people in the world for being so mean to him. And sometimes he even hated the universe for casting the type of cruel fate he had on him. And on the evil days, he hated himself. His dad must have heard his thoughts somehow because he looked over at him. He slowly removed his glasses, concern evident in his voice. He asked, "Hey, how are you feeling?" Andrew hesitates and then walks into the dining area. He sits in the chair adjacent to his dad's and pours water from the pitcher on the table into a glass cup. He feels his father's eyes on him as he drinks. His dad waits for him to finish drinking, and then he asks, "Okay now?" Even though he wasn't anything but, Andrew nods. His dad also nods and clears his throat. "You want to talk about it?" he asks. Maybe it was the fatigue from the day he had, or perhaps he was just tired of keeping it all in. But the automatic response he always had prepared didn't suffice at the moment, and he found himself laying it all out to his dad. He broke down and told him everything, from the humiliation to the embarrassments, the fundamental injustice, and everything he had been going through since he started going to Carmen. His dad listened while he talked, not once interrupting him, and when Andrew was finally done, his throat had gone scratchy, and the back of his eyes were itchy. The tears were threatening, but he did his best to keep them in check. He was not going to cry in front of his dad. He knew it was all right if he did, but he needed not to. When it looked like Andrew was finally done, his father said, "I want to tell you a story about a crow and an eagle. There was this eagle who got picked on by a crow, kind of like how you are getting picked on by these boys. The crow would fly above this eagle and peck on the eagle's eyes, kind of like how these boys act, air above you and pick on your sickness. And the crow, after doing this, would fly far away where the eagle cannot reach her, kind of like how these boys walk around feeling full of themselves after picking on you. But then the eagle does something. She flies straight and high, higher than the crow can reach, and because of this, the crow falls to her death, as she does not have the required oxygen to fly that high." At this point, his dad pauses and looks into Andrew's eyes. He holds eye contact with him as he adds, "And that, son, is what you must do. The eagle is what you must become. You must soar high, higher than those boys. You must fly, son, higher than those boys. So high they don't have enough oxygen to meet up. You must be the eagle, son." 20 years later. The rain pours down heavily. It had not let down since morning. It was 2 p.m. A black Chevy pulls up in front of a modern-style house. A man dressed in a black suit comes out of the car, runs towards the other side of the car, holds an umbrella and opens the door. A man of the same age comes out of the vehicle, and the two both walk into the house. When they get to the entrance, the man holding the umbrella rushes forward to open the door for the other man. The house's interior is Andrew's childhood home. And as the two men enter the house, Andrew's dad comes into view. Andrew is the man who the other man, Nick, was holding an umbrella over. Behind them, another man about the same age as Andrew and Nick, Mason, rushes in from the pouring rain. He is the chauffeur who drove Andrew over. He was soaking wet as he stood in the entrance, not quite in the house, nor outside in the rain either. Andrew stands in front of his father and they stare at each other. Unsaid things and shared memories whisper between them. The rain continues to pour down on the roof in heavy droplets. The sounds of their platters, the only sound that can be heard above the heads as Andrew and his father stand facing each other. Andrew breaks the silence. "Hello, Dad," he says, his voice thick with emotion. His dad's eyes shone with unshed tears. Just then, another man rushes in the rain, soaking wet. He stands on the threshold and tries to shake the water away from his hair, even as he tries to protect the papers he had in his right hand from falling. He rushes into the living room where Andrew and his dad are. He awkwardly fumbles to the right as he stands beside Andrew. Andrew barely glances at him as he walks towards his father. They hug tightly, then they let go and sit on opposite chairs, facing each other. "So how are you?" "Work. I feel it's been forever since I saw you last," Andrew's dad said. Andrew chuckles and replies, "Yeah, I've missed you too, Dad. Work has been hectic and starting your own company is difficult, but I've been doing okay. And since it seems to be getting on its feet, I needed to see you. And so here I am." His dad nods his head slowly, smiling. "Well, I'm glad you did. It sometimes gets lonely around here, you know, and having my only son come visit me, well, this is easily the highlight of my week," Dad said. They both laugh. "And your diabetes? Do you have any episodes?" Andrew's dad asked, throwing one question after another, concern palpable in his voice. Andrew laughed softly and replied, "Relax, Dad. One at a time, please. Yes, I am taking my medication regularly. I am doing good on that front." Andrew paused, and his expression got serious as he continues. "I know what we went through with my diabetes, and wouldn't be so irresponsible to let that happen again. I have become even more careful, I promise. My medicine is here with me. It's with one of them." He tips his head towards the entrance where Chris stands. His dad's eyes follow Andrew's gestures. "Yes, I was going to ask. Who are they? Should I offer them some tea?" Andrew smiled and replied, "Remember that story you told me about the crow and the eagle? How the crow would always pick on the eagle and fly away?" "Well," Andrew paused for dramatic effect as he points to Chris, Nick, and Mason. "These are the crows, Dad. Meet Chris, Nick, and Mason. The crows who flew away that day. The bullies who made my life a living hell in Carmen High." He stopped and looked straight into his dad's eyes, his voice firm with no trace of the tired little Andrew who was constantly getting bullied. His eyes clear as he maintained eye contact. "I became the eagle, Dad. I became the eagle, and I soared high, higher than the crows could ever fly, and they fell." He continued, "That day, Dad, when I came home and you told me the story about the crow and the eagle, you gave me the courage to move on when I wanted to give up. And I am most glad I took your advice, because I wouldn't be here if I didn't. Thank you, Dad."